This episode is brought to you by AppWork. Much more than maintenance, AppWork is advanced business intelligence. You can streamline your maintenance workflows and keep an eye on the leaderboard as service team members enjoy the gamification of maintenance. If that sounds interesting, visit appworkco.com. That's appworkco.com and transform your productivity today. Keep calm and carry on with your revenue management and your pricing algorithms to an extent. So I want to unpack a piece that Donald Davidoff put out on his blog, getreba.com. I think it was at some point last week, but Donald took some time to actually unpack one of the bills, or I think it was a couple of the bills that have been introduced in states as of late, attempting to outlaw algorithmic pricing in the rental housing space. And it's interesting because it seems like states just keep piling on and piling on and piling on. And the bill, I like the way Donald frames this, in that it's all bills lead with clickbait, if you will. And he calls out this piece of language that says, "an act," in all capital letters, "to amend the real property law in relation to prohibiting the use of algorithmic device by a landlord for the purpose of determining the amount of rent to charge a residential tenant." And then he goes on to highlight some other sections of the bill where it just, he says, to use his word, it just piles it on, essentially the preamble to the bill itself. And so he goes on and talks about sort of things as it relates to the language they use as an introduction to these bills. But then he goes on to cite something that I thought was very interesting, not an angle I'd not heard before, not an angle, but a fact that I'd not heard before. And the fact lies right in the bill. And he calls it out and it goes like this. A determination of rent amount, use of an algorithm device in setting an amount prohibited, number one, in setting the amount of rent to be charged to a tenant for the occupancy of a residential premises, including determining any charge in the amount of rent to be charged for the renewal or renewed occupancy of a residence premises. A landlord shall not employ, use, or rely upon, or cause another person to employ, use, or rely on an algorithmic device that uses, incorporates, or was trained with non-public competitor data. And Donald calls out a very specific word in that language, and that specific word is an, A-N. And he goes on to talk about how that does not prohibit the use of all algorithmic methodologies to come up with rental pricing or renewal rental pricing, but a specific piece of data, and that is non-public competitor data. So these bills, or this particular bill that he's calling out and that has been introduced in the U.S. Senate, it just uses very different language, and that different language is germane to a very specific piece of algorithmic pricing. It is not specific to all algorithmic pricing, especially in the arena of pulling in non-public data, or public data rather. This is an interesting article. It's an interesting sort of, not a twist, but a new piece of information that I had not heard before. So I wanted to get it out there. I wanted to promote this piece and point you in the direction of getreba.com /blog /multifamily algorithmic pricing. I'll link it up in the show notes. That way you can go and find the article yourself. I think Donald was part of the team that introduced revenue management into the multifamily space back in the day when he was with Archstone. And later on, Equity Residential adopted or purchased or invested in revenue management as well, LRO specifically. So I say that because I was there at the time when we started to roll out LRO into the Equity Residential ecosystem. So anyway, I will link this up in these show notes. It's definitely worth your time to read it. Take care. We'll talk to you again soon. And I want to give one more hat tip to AppWork for sponsoring today's episode. Imagine carrying a digital make-ready board in your pocket with work order tracking and maintenance technician leaderboards designed to gamify the process and bring out your team's competitive best. As a reminder, if that sounds interesting, you can go to appworkco.com. That's appworkco.com today to learn more.